Thank you, Blake. I also just want to point out that Matt Sorensen, our public affairs manager, joined us as well. And as we get into questions and things, I always appreciate collaboration. So Matt's input on this question we get to great. So hello, everybody. As Blake said, my name is Travis Knudsen. I'm the executive director for the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency. And so the presentation here is a little bit of a, what does Lrapa do? And then I wanted to put a flavor to it of what is my flavor maybe of Lrapa be, and what are the things I'm looking forward to and really hoping our agency will be able to accomplish here as forward. So to start off, Lrapa, we do a number of different things, but first and foremost, we were established in 1968 with the dedication to protecting and improving public health through the maintaining and improvement of air quality here in Lane County. We ensure environmental compliance through a number of different approaches. The first is to monitor air quality to say, okay, well, how good, how bad is the air quality? What programs do we need that we can work on to resolve or address some of the issues that we're finding from our monitoring? And that could look like issuing permits or then enforcing the rules and regulations that we have here in Lane County. We do, as I mentioned, monitoring. We have a pretty expansive monitoring network here in Lane County that without Lrapa's presence would be not robust. That effort would be sort of sub-source to bring a bit more monitoring here to the county. And that really is just the local benefit. All the work that Lrapa does, if Lrapa was not here, would be done by DEQ. But our philosophy is that the local effort, the local understanding of the needs provides that more effective governance for Lane County residents. And so that's where we really sit into the whole picture. So breaking down kind of where our authority is under the Clean Air Act, you could say that Lrapa is designed, or our intent is to implement the Clean Air Act in Lane County. So the federal government back in the 1970s with provisions in 1990s passed the Clean Air Act. Congress said, we like clean air and we would like America to have clean air. So let's put some regulations in place so we can have clean air. But EPA, of course, does not want to do the work that they said that we all need to do. So instead, they passed down that responsibility to the state level. So in Oregon, that's the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They get with the DEQ, or the DEQ gets with the EPA to say, we would like to do these programs, or this is our approach to implementing the Clean Air Act. And that's called the State Implementation Plan, which is something EPA reviews and then processes. Now, Lrapa, we're kind of that third leg in the stool, you could say, of the Clean Air Act, which is that local governance. So our partners, which is the cities of Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove, Oak Ridge, as well as Lane County government, came together and formed an intergovernmental agreement, which is our authority. We have our own titles, our rules and regulations, Title 1 through 51. Which we have a board of directors who ask and provide that authority to Lrapa for us to essentially implement the Clean Air Act in Lane County. And of course, as governance goes, the more layers in, the more stringent you can become, but we can never be less strict than the state, and the state can never be less strict than the federal government. An important note for here, though, if you are paying attention to some of the more topical items in the news and political swaying that's taking place and changes as federal administrations move, one of the things I think that Lrapa really brings to the table and value is more of a ability to navigate what you could say some swaying perspectives on the federal level of environmental regulation and environmental health. So our ability is just another component to what are the needs of Lane County, what are the rules and regulations we have, provide more certainty for Lane County residents, as well as even the business community, among what can be some swing perspectives at the federal level. So how does Lrapa pay for itself? How does our work get funded? Well, in part from local support from our partners who signed our IGA founding us. So collectively, that total comes out to being $203,500 for our current fiscal year that we're in, which is fiscal year 25. Springfield contribution to that is just almost $34,000. So this funding is very important. It's $200,000 we leverage against the EPA. So because we, as a government agency that implements the Clean Air Act, we have access to what's called a Section 105 base grant. So these are non-competitive federal dollars that the EPA gives to Lrapa because we implement the Clean Air Act, on behalf of the federal government. There are some strings attached to that though, and it's this thing called the maintenance of effort. So one of the responsibilities that we do on the financial side is Lrapa keeps track of all of the dollars that are federal dollars, which includes some of our permitting programs like Title V as an example program. All of those federal dollars we keep over in this camp, and then all of our non-federal dollars we keep over in our other camp. And we have to spend about 1.4 million non-federal dollars to get access to this EPA maintenance of efforts. So that's where that local partnership support comes in, because clearing a hurdle of about $1.7 million every year, and it always is increasing at least by $1 each year, emphasizes the importance of that partnership support so we can clear that hurdle to get us access to these non-competitive federal dollars, which is about $300,000 a year to our general fund.
Say that amount again, please.
About $300,000 to our general fund each year. Another approach for how Lrapa funds our work is through fees. So we do have partner support, but we also charge fees to the regulated community when they submit an application or when they need a modification to their permit, or they just simply need a permit. Our approach is a little bit different than the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. You'll notice that graph on there, the blue line, I know the text can be kind of small at this vantage point, but the blue line is Lrapa's fee increase structure. The red line has been DEQ'd since 2001. So Lrapa, our state permits, which are called air contaminant discharge permits, as well as our asbestos fees, because we regulate asbestos here in Lynn County, they go up by 4% a year. There's a program, a state air quality program called Cleaner Air Oregon that looks at the health impact of emissions a little bit more closely. That has fees associated with it as well. It's a newer program, but that goes up by 3% annually. So in total, kind of what you see here, this gain on this graph, that averages or Lrapa's approach has resulted in 104% fee increase since the early 2000s. In comparison to DEQ's approach, they've seen 134% fee increase to their fees. So DEQ had a 20% increase in 2007, a 20% increase in 2014, a 70% increase in 2020, and then they are going before the Oregon legislature in the long session to ask for a 17% fee increase. So I think that another benefit of that local approach is we have our own fee schedule that we can set, and it's our belief that a more consistent budget-friendly approach is easier on the regulated community than larger leaps every so often. And our approach, our philosophy is to try to align our fees as closely in cost to DEQ with maybe a little bit of a discount. So that way we're not from an economic vantage point providing too much of a +1 to Lane County, but then on the other edge, you might not be too far behind. So it is important that we try to align our fees as closely with DEQ with maybe just a little bit of a discount. So regulatory compliance. So a big part of the programs that we do is issuing permits to industry sources. So we say you have these processes going on your site, you're emitting this pollution. We want to know how much pollution that is, and we want to kind of draw that line of how much is too much and then make sure you're not going above that. The way that we do that is through issuing permits, and being on top of how quickly we are renewing or issuing permits is important, because if there's new rules or if there's new regulations, we can't really enforce on those rules and regulations until we're successful in getting them into the permits. And so us being quicker on how fast we turning those permits around does result in more environmental protection. So the little red line that I've drawn there on the graph, that is the EPA's target for backlogs for ourselves, and we are below that red line. When I'm giving this presentation to more of an internal perspective, I put a green chart on there, which is for DEQ. And I'll just say, there's a reason why this chart goes all the way up to the 40 and 50% line. But in this setting, I just want to emphasize sort of where Lrapa is at on that approach. Some of the services that we do offer, I think that stands out from DEQ in comparison, is we have more of a robust air quality complaints and enforcement process. So 2024, we received 502 air quality complaints that we were able to digest, respond to, understand what the needs may be, and then respond accordingly. A large component of our complaints are outdoor burning. So if you live in the metro area, you might not be as familiar with outdoor burning, but you go out of town into the rural communities, And we have lots of growth in the Willamette Valley, and one easy way or effective way of managing that is by putting it, all that yard debris in your yard and then burning it. But that creates smoke, that's air pollution. So we respond to complaints where neighbors might be smoking out their neighbors for not following some of our programmatic guidelines. So we can address that and protect that air quality. We also, through our enforcement, we issue civil penalties when we do find instances of non-compliance. In 2024 fiscal year, we assessed $21,000 in enforcement. About 66% of that was in Boone, 28% in Springfield, and about 6% in Lynn County. If DEQ places an enforcement action, those enforcement dollars go to the state secretary fund. In Lane County, if we place an enforcement action, we collect civil penalties, those dollars go to the Lane County. We don't hold on to those from Lrapa. So similar kind of parallel, but instead of the state offers, it goes to Lane County. Here's a look at some of those complaints that we do have. So that's a map of Lane County. There's some color coding there to give you a sense of the different types of complaints that we have. The numbers there is from April of last year to March of this year, so kind of freshly updated. You can see the wide variety or the landscape or the region that we are engaged in our complaint response. There's a bit more of a zoomed in view. You can see what the types of complaints and where they are around the metro area. Since 1979, our complaints is almost about 30,000 complaints that we have responded to. We love hearing from folks about what's bothering them, even if it's something that we, from a regulatory perspective, can't act on because it's not a violation of any of our rules. We still appreciate hearing about that because knowing what are the things that are driving people crazy from an air quality perspective gives us insight on, from a rulemaking perspective, where might some new regulations or where might some adjustments actually be helpful. I mentioned a moment ago that our monitoring is a little bit more robust than what it would be without the DEQ. So we have 8 monitors throughout Lane County, which are established there. These are what's called federal reference monitors or federal equivalent methods, so FRM or FEM, which basically means the EPA says we want to monitor air quality and we want to make sure that we're having an apples to apples comparison. So you need to monitor in a way where you follow these strict technical guidelines and approaches. So that way we can be confident in the data in Oregon can be compared to the data in other parts of the country. So we have 8 different monitors that follow those regimented approaches to make sure that the EPA can compare that data fairly to other data across the country. And here's what we monitor for in Lynn County. Particulate matter, which you could essentially just think of as smoke, particulate matter, smoke. They're not like this, they're essentially the same, even though not specifically. PM10 and PM25 indicates how big that particle is. So the smaller the number, the smaller it is, and the deeper into your lungs it goes. The deeper into your lungs it goes, the more likely it is to pass into your bloodstream and accumulate elsewhere in your body and can lead to a whole bunch of health challenges. Studies continue to show that the smaller the particle, the greater the potential health impact. We also monitor for surface ozone. That's a summertime monitoring thing. So ozone is a pollutant that's called a secondary pollutant, which means it forms in the air. So if you have VOCs or volatile organic compounds, so emissions from cars, from industry, filling up your gas tank at the gas station emits VOCs. On our sunny, on our really hot days, the UV radiation, the heat takes those VOCs and they undergo a chemical reaction in the air, which is why it's called a secondary pollutant. And it forms that brown smog that you can see. I grew up in the Denver metro area where they have a big ozone problem. The Denver brown cloud is kind of a thing. That's ozone. We have that issue here in Oregon. It's more of a Portland metro area as well as a Medford metro area, which is why they have vehicle inspection programs in those parts of the state. We don't have that in Lane County because our ozone monitoring says it's something to watch, but it's not at a level where we have to take the action of coming up with a similar like vehicle inspection program or some other effort. And then the last thing we look for is a thing called hazardous air pollutants. So the EPA has defined 188 different pollutants like formaldehyde, benzenes that are a little more chemically, a little bit more, that could be harmful for health. And we do specific monitoring for that. We have one hazardous air pollutant monitor that's at Highway 99 and Elmira in Green. That's to look at some of those more complicated chemicals and try to get a sense to how much our HAP profile is in the county. And then also, There's these things called purple air sensors, which are becoming more and more commonly known by folks, but a few years ago it was this unknown item, but it's basically a commercial level monitor. So it's not the government level where the EPA says you have to follow all of these specific approaches. It bypasses all of that. It's just a small, size of your fist, commercial level air monitor for, a couple $100 that you can put up. And it gives you good data on how smoky the air quality is outside, essentially. Lrapa has installed over the years since about 2017, which actually began when Merlin was the director of the organization. We have about 100 or so of those purple air sensors installed across the county. And it's a great way to fill in some of those gaps of our larger federal level monitors. So a big reason why we exist is we monitor the air quality to see where it is. We implement programs to make it better, and then we track our progress. And so here is the progress. Our proof in the pudding over the last few years, from 2014 to 2023. Eugene, down through Florence, or different monitoring sites are on there. That red line you see is the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. That line actually was lowered in February of 2024, but is an item that the Trump administration is thinking on and reconsidering if they want to raise that line up again. However, there is a component that's important with showing this data that's not quite demonstrating all the information, which is wildfires, especially in the Pacific Northwest, continue to become an ongoing problem, and wildfires create a lot of smoke. And smoke is particulate matter, and that is a big concern here in Wayne County. So the graph I showed you just a second ago was taking all the wildfire data and removing it from the data set, which the EPA does allow us to do. We go to the EPA through a process called an exceptional events process, where we say wildfires are a little outside of our control or our region's control to effectively stop those things from taking place. So we shouldn't hold the community accountable for this air pollution that they're not directly causing. I think you could make an argument for man-made climate change and how that's a kind of a direct cause, but for Lane County being able to actually stop wildfires occurring in a reasonable place, we're limited. So the EPA allows us to discount that data. However, we are all still breathing this. Just because the EPA says we don't have to worry about this data does not mean that our lived experience is not that. So all to say that a lot of hard work engaging with the regulated community, like wood stove programs to swap out wood stoves, all of these efforts have amounted to good progress in improving our air quality, but we now have an emerging trend related to climate change that is undermining a lot of that good work that's been underway for years. So how do we pivot? How does Lrapa look at this problem and start to address it? Well, that comes through grant funding and programs to work on it. A problem that did exist for Lrapa years ago was Oak Ridge. Their air quality was not meeting that red line that I was talking about for air quality standards. They were above it. So because of that, we as an agency and organization were really interested in finding programs that could help swap out wood stoves in Oak Ridge, which is the cause of their issue, so we can have cleaner burning devices in the airshed. So in 2019, Lrapa was awarded a targeted airship grant for $4.9 million. This still under Merlin's tenure when he was here. He was the driver of that. Then we also in 2022 were awarded a $2.7 million targeted airship grant. Now these grants were focused on wintertime air quality problems in Oak Ridge because the wood stoves were identified as the source of their winter air quality issues. This problem in Oak Ridge has effectively been kind of solved at this point. They're below the red dotted line. They're continuing to see improvement. So the program has been shifting a little bit. In 2023 or 2024, almost 2024, Lrapa was awarded $1 million environmental justice government to government grant. And this was still the same program doing wood stove swap outs, but it was shifting a little bit to say, maybe we can do some defensible space work on homes. Maybe we can do things like putting some things on homes intakes for the vents so embers are less likely to get into the attic and catch on homes. So more of a wildfire defensible space kind of process. And that was some of the pivot and the shift is, okay, this wildfires are an issue. How can we work on mitigating some of those fuels? Unfortunately, a recent update in March 21st of 2025, Lrapa was provided a termination notice of that grant under the federal administrator. So we have lost the ability for that program, but the work is still important. We're still engaged in Oak Ridge and elsewhere and trying to find ways that we can keep working on this issue regardless of what those perspectives may be at the federal level. So I want to spend a little bit of time elaborating a bit more on that Oak Ridge Air program, which is what this funding has been supporting. So Oak Ridge Air, which you see there in the center, that's just a brand. It's just a logo. It's kind of a marketing, I don't want to use the word gimmick, but it was something that was put together as a way to demonstrate to the community, here's a program, here's this one point and source of things that you need to know or be aware of. And in the background, all of these partners are coordinating to provide these services and these home interventions and program offerings to the community. So what does it look like? What does Oak Ridge do? Well, the majority of this program is to replace old wood stoves, install better burning ones, install ductless heat pumps so people don't have to burn wood to heat their home. A benefit of a ductless heat pump too, which from a climate resilience perspective, when it gets really hot and we're asking people to close their doors and windows because it's smoky outside. Well, if they have a ductless heat pump, they can cool their home as well. So that's a big component of the program, as well as small home repair. So if the home has a cracked door or a hole in the roof and the heat is escaping from there, if we repair the home, it'll retain heat better and therefore not as much wood needs to be burned. Another important part of the program is providing dry season firewood. So if you just go out into the forest and you find some wood laying on the ground, you go to burn it, you're going to create a lot of smoke because there's a lot of moisture from that wood, as opposed to having wood that's been adequately dried and seasoned. So the program tries to connect low-income and elderly residents in Oak Ridge with discounted firewood so they can burn with less emissions. Educating the community and engaging with the school district. What you see here are some pictures of some wood storage crates being put together. The Oak Ridge High School shop department basically assembles these, and then in the community, people who need them, they're provided with these storage places where they can store their wood, keep it dry, and then there'll be less smoke from that dry wood, the benefit of some for. And then a component of the program too, which we have completed or at least passed out all the funding that we had for air purifiers, was to connect people with home purification, because if it is smoky outside, if the air quality is bad, a HEPA air purifier is actually a really good way to pull some of that harmful particle, that PM2.5, out of the air and protect your health. So there's other components to the Oak Ridge Air program as well, but that's sort of the broad brushes. And I do think it's really important because wildfires continue to be an ongoing issue. This year is a picture taken on October 20th in 2022, which in the Eugene Springfield area, 2022 wasn't the worst wildfire year for us in terms of smoke intrusion, but for Oak Ridge, they had 60 days where their air quality was above the level that's considered harmful to health. 9 of those days, the 24-hour average, of averaging the full day, was hazardous on the air quality index. So people were living in hazardous air quality for 9 days. 60 days, they were living in unhealthy air quality for the community. So one of the programmatic efforts under Oak Ridge Air is communication. Like, how can we tell people about the air quality? How can we tell them what things they might do to protect their health? And so we have a outreach texting program where people can sign up and we can text them directly messages to them. So this slideshow shows just some of the different messaging components that we have in the images and the things we're trying to update the community on, from a winter time, hey, it's a yellow day, maybe we don't use wood stoves, to, hey, there's a wildfire in your backyard and tomorrow morning it's going to be really smoky, so don't leave your doors open, windows open tonight. This approach has been really great for building trust in the Oak Ridge community. Good messaging to the community from the community builds that recognition and trust in the community. So another example of how we are trying to pivot with changing times, Oak Ridge Air is one example, but another one, and this is something that I really get very excited about and speak to a lot, is as a smaller agency, we have more of an opportunity to pivot and to try these things and explore different opportunities than what a state government or federal government would like to do. So new technologies, we don't have quite as much bureaucracy we have to work through before we can implement it. We can more quickly train staff on some of the tools that may be coming down the line from a technology perspective. And one example is artificial intelligence. So like ChatGPT, for those who are kind of familiar with that brand, how can Lrapa see this tool and maybe utilize it for our future? I have a worldview that, this is very much a, you can say the cat's out the bag, it's open, it's out there, Pandora's box has been open, so we just need to reconcile it and embrace it. And it's no real surprise, I mean, throughout history, humanity continues to engineer technological revolutions one after the next. They kind of seem to be getting a little bit closer and closer on a time frame perspective. So I don't think that we should be too surprised that we're stepping into another technological revolution as significant as the internet. I think as significant as the printing press. And it's no surprise because engineers set out to create artificial intelligence. And they said, how does the human brain work? Let's build something that is designed the same way as we understand the human brain. So that picture you see there, that's sort of a neuron up in the human brain, and then a sort of a computer equivalent that some of these AI systems are using to try to replicate some human intelligence. So it's a design neural architecture that's not biological, instead of it's just synthetic, but it's an attempt to plug all the pieces together in the same way. And this is a little bit of a conscious sort of philosophical reflection, but there is a new theory, new relatively 2004 from TLG. It's the integrated information theory. So what this says is it proposes that consciousness is something that arises from just how integrated information becomes. And our brains, they're really good at integrating information. So we have a high level of conscious experience of plants, a worm, maybe there's not as much integration, maybe that experience is a little bit less. But I put this here all to say that these new AI systems have a lot of information, they're integrating this information, and we can engage with them in a way where it seems like they understand what we're talking about and can respond to us in a helpful way. So the question becomes, how do the workflows of tomorrow collaborate with these increasingly complicated and more capable systems each and every day? And so this is something I see this as an opportunity for Lrapa to really be on the leading edge and benefiting from some of the power that these tools will bring to us. So a little bit of a story here before we get into this. I found myself in a situation needing to step Lrapa into this space of AI embracing a little bit more fully, because when I was the public affairs manager back in 2022, the director at the time was a gentleman named Steve Dietrich. And I was working on the annual reports, and I needed to draft for Steve a letter from the director that kind of goes at the beginning of the annual report. And I wasn't sure the best way to go about doing it, but Steve had sent out an email about a week before that was a bullet point list of all the things from his perspective were accomplishes that Lrapa achieved over the last year. I took that email, I gave it to what was ChatGPT that was about 3 weeks publicly available at the time. And I said, can you write a letter from the director based off this email? And I hit enter, and 30 seconds later out came a letter that wasn't the final copy of what we used, but it was pretty close to what we ended up using. And it took what was kind of an afternoon worth of work for me. And it was a 5-minute exercise, and I saw the value of that. So I continued to use ChatGPT and all these other things for my work, knowing that maybe that's not the most professional approach to do that, but it wasn't an issue with the director at the time, so it's all good. Then, when I became the director of the organization, and I wanted to continue to use these tools, I recognized I had to reconcile that what is Lrapa's policy, what is our ethics, what is our philosophy on this new tool that we haven't really figured out yet. So I created an AI use policy for the organization that I have implemented, and I'm trying to really encourage our organization figuring out how to embrace these tools and what we're doing. So part of our AI use and management policy, these are some of the philosophies, is an ethical responsibility. I do think if we're going to use these tools, we need to be transparent about the fact that we're using them. We need to be willing to tell people like, yep, this came from an AI tool and it's fine because it's just like a computer. We used it in this way and it's a tool that will always be good in the future. But we need to be honest with it. A human-centric approach, there are a lot of pitfalls with these tools. They can be making things up and they don't know it. They can get things wrong and they don't totally understand. So they're great first draft generators, but the human still needs to be accountable for all of the language, all of the content, all of the ideas that this first draft generator helps you more quickly come up with. Data security, one of the things with new technology is there could be things that we learn that we don't know. There are stories, there are examples of someone talking to a chat GPT. And then on the other side of the world, some of that conversation coming out in that conversation with a different user elsewhere. And that's a worrying component of if you're putting private information into these systems and they pop out elsewhere, there's some concern. We have some data sensitivity guidelines on what we do and do not feed into these systems. We provide good reference materials. These tools are really successful if instead of you asking it to sort of make assumptions on its own, you say, here's a bunch of PDFs for you to read, understand, and gain context on the subject matter by which we're talking. And that will assure that what you're getting out of it is going to be a lot more accurate and less hallucinogenic, I guess you could say, in terms of what it's making up. As an air regulatory agency, as an environmental agency, these tools do have a pretty significant environmental impact. The data centers and emissions that are created to power the tools is pretty high and costly. So every time we hit enter on these tools, there is an environmental impact to that, which is yet to be reconciled, but as an air agency, something that we need to keep front and center to our meetings. And then finally, equitable use. I do think that if there was one group at Lrapa that was given AI tools and not another group, that wouldn't be equitable or fair, especially since it's a new tool. We want to see all the different workflows and how they can be improved based on how it's effective, as well as also recognizing that these AI tools have a bias. If they're trained on a whole bunch of data that doesn't talk about all these different topics, when you start asking about those topics, it'll have a bias to it. If it's as an example, a large language model that has only been fed physics journals in German and not physics journals in English, if you were to engage this large language model on your English sort of questions about physics, there's a bias there in the sense that it's learning on German versus English. So it's those nuances for the model that we need to understand when we're using them, so we can identify where there could be some undesirable outcomes from it. So from a data protection information management, I did want to include this because it is a real thing that you can put data into these tools and then maybe somewhere else in a different conversation with a different person, that information comes out. So one of the things that's nice about Lrapa is we are a public organization. Our data is public. So records like our permits, records like emission data, records like our general operations, those are fine to go into these tools. That said, Lrapa we don't use ChatGPT, we use a different company, Anthropic. They have a bot called Claude. And Claude and Anthropic's plan in their contract for team plan have more positive language of confidence for me that our stuff that we give to Claude is not going to be used in its training data, so it maybe shows up with a different user somewhere else later in the world. And so I appreciated that about Anthropic's approach. And so we use that as our tool at Lrapa. But if it is a confidential business information, CBI, by policy, those do not get uploaded to any of these systems because a business says, hey, this could be sensitive to us, please don't share it. So we're not even taking the risk of putting it in a place where it could potentially sneak out someone else. And our Title 13 and our Title 34 set what CBI is considered the definition of it, as well as how we process those CBI requests. So last kind of thing here on AI, I'm excited about it, so I wanted to kind of go on a tangent. So this is Claude Team Plan. This is a tool that we use. If you have used ChatGPT, just in general, it's essentially the same thing, but it's with a different company. I do think their model is a little bit more with it in the brain. It understands kind of what I'm asking for a little bit faster. Perplexity is another one. It's a free tool. If you haven't tried using Perplexity, I'd encourage you. It is free. It's a great way to do. It's like Google search on overdrive with real good, helpful citations to what you're looking for. We have Copilots because we have a Microsoft 365 account, and so it kind of comes with Copilot. Copilot's kind of Copilot's kind of dumb. It's here because we have it through Microsoft, but Claude is a lot smarter. And it seems weird to talk about computers and saying, well, this one's kind of dumb and this is, but that is the weird sci-fi world that we find ourselves in the future. And then Canva, which I was actually surprised by this. Canva is a program where you make like social media posts. You can make posters. But they have AI incorporated in it where you can start to adjust the photos and you can say, crop this person out. I just want this person. And it uses an AI tool to do that. So by consequence, it's included in our AI policy. So this is kind of the wrap-up slide. So essentially, Lrapa's been around for a really long time. Been founded in 1968. We have a vision that we want fire quality to be protected. We see a lot of benefit in collaboration, and we think local collaboration is how we can make that happen. I think our first purpose is providing some of that regulatory stability and accountability. We really value our service to the community, our air quality complaints, and being responsive to that, taking appropriate enforcement actions when needed. And to have a good impact on creating a resilient framework from the federal to the state to the local level to assure that air quality is something that is maintained and improved, because it does have a health impact. There is a public service or public health component to our mission. And that is, if we live in bad air quality, we get sick, our kids get sick, our families get sick. So that's why air quality is very important. And actually, one kind of last thing, one of the things that when I first started Lrapa, Merlin actually said to me, when it came to air, land, and water, it was something along the lines of, Merlin, you said, you can go 2 weeks without food before it really becomes problematic to you. You can go a couple days without water before it's like really a big issue for you, but you can only go a few minutes without air before that is really a problematic item to you. And that resonated with me. And I do think that air from the different mediums is one that can have the largest impact on most people. So that's it, but Matt and I are happy to take questions on what we're up to and engage and participate in discussion.
Questions?
So does anybody have any questions for Travis?
So a couple of questions. One on the intergovernmental agreements, is there a reason that we haven't approached or like Junction City, Coburg, Crest Royal, Florence? So that's one. And then follow-up questions in terms of, well, I'll just put it out. So a couple of weeks ago, we had Willamette Lane, and they're doing more controlled burns. You know, it's on a very localized, but I listened to a farmer talking about the chemicals they're having to put in because they can't burn the fields to be able to maintain the forest, because we have not really maintained or done hardly anything for decades. The fires are going to be more intense. Forget about climate change. You have fuel, you have heat, you have fire. It's explosive, and so the question I have is that really controlled burns are the best way to be able to manage a ton of stuff, but it looks bad and you got the other issues. So those are kind of the two questions.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those questions. I would say on the IGA and partnership inclusion to that, there is a limited number of seats that we can have through our state statute. So that's 9 members on the board. And so we have a full contingent of 9. So if we were to outreach or to be approached by, say, for example, Junction City or Coburg or Florence, saying, we want to have a seat on your oversight committee or board, we could entertain that. Then it becomes a discussion with the board of, we have 9 seats, how do we want to adjust these? The makeup of the body is, the first seat for all the partners is an elected seat, so be it a mayor or city council. Then subsequent seats, which are based on population size, the at-large seats, the city of Springfield has 1 at-large seat. So the board representation for the city of Springfield is Commissioner Lovell, as well as Jared Hensley, who's the at-large city appointed public representation. He works for Roseboro. And then the city of Eugene has 4 seats, the elected officials, Matt Keating, and then they have 3 appointed. So that becomes a political discussion on how do we shift. And there was a point where you could have, before we expanded to 9 board members, Cottage Grove and Oak Ridge kind of had a rotating seat for 1 year, someone would be on. So it would enter into a space like that, there would be some rotation. But there are boards for local air pollution control authorities where they have rotating seats because of the interest to be a part of that oversight committee.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then on the other question for wildfire engagement, one of the things that's difficult in Oregon is we have so much national forest. And as I understand engaging with the U.S. Forest Service is they have plans that were established in 1994, and these plans are really difficult to change and adjust. In the same way from an airspace where Lrapa, we want to make a change, we have to go through SIP, the State Implementation Planning, we engage with the EPA and they say, do we like what you're doing, or do we not like what you're doing? The Forest Service has a similar process and it's kind of in a bureaucratic place at the moment. So how Lrapa is trying to engage on these items are things like our Oak Ridge program with South Willamette Solutions, which is a nonprofit based in Oak Ridge. They do a lot of things like trying to figure out how we can turn what is a resource in the forest, even the national forest, the Cedar Creek wildfire burned. All of those trees, they're kind of a defensible fire sort of defense for about 5 years before then they become a hazard. So how can we take those resources, figure out a way to turn them into a commodity, and then maybe sell it, perhaps firewood. So engaging with South Willamette Solutions, there's a company, Brock's Woodlot, through a private-public partnership where they help to set up that firewood distribution program. And they're looking to engage with the Forest Service to pull some of that wood out. They turn it into a firewood, which they can then sell as a commodity and support the Oak Ridge program. So it's finding those solutions to how can we get at what is a forest that hasn't been as well managed as it could. And we see our philosophy on things like prescribed burning. Those are effective tools and ones that we'll need to consider and utilize. The challenge there is you're going to be putting pollution into the air, you're going to be putting smoke. Kind of, again, on focus on Oak Ridge as well. They have a thing that we engaged on to help to form, which was a smoke safety plan. So that says if there's a potential for smoke to move into the Oak Ridge area, this prescribed burn can't take place. But Lrapa with SWS and Oak Ridge formed a smoke safety plan, which now provides an exemption to that you can't burn because smoke may go into this sensitive community area. Because we have a plan, our texting program, we can say, hey, there may be prescribed smoke in the neighborhood tomorrow or later this week. Make sure your HEPA purifiers are going, make sure your doors and windows are closed. So that way that burn can still take place. Yeah, maybe some smoke may impact the community, but they've been given the heads up, and in whole, the benefit of that burn is going to protect the community more so than what might be an hour or two of extra PM here.
Travis, you mentioned the sort of hierarchy of regulation. The state EPA or DEQ can be a little more severe or more severe than EPA, but can't be less. Lrapa could be more. Given the attitude of the current administration on reducing regulations, is there some risk that Lrapa will be prevented or precluded from having regulations that are more burdensome or more rigorous than EPA, for example?
So the way that air regulation works in the United States is through a model called cooperative feudalism, which essentially is the federal government says, here's what we want in a broad brush strokes. Then the more local effort can be more stringent, they can do different changes, and it gets approved. And so there's no challenge in if the EPA framework, the Clean Air Act was to go away, there still is state authority, state framework that does exist. There are components, there are gaps in DEQ, which would be Lrapa's framework too, that is backfilled by that federal level. And if that goes away, there would have to be some fast rulemakings to try to cover those gaps and fill those holes. So there wouldn't be anything from preventing us from regulating, but one thing that could be challenging, and this we'll see how it plays out, but the federal government supplies funding. So there could be adjustments to the terms and conditions. There could be changes to that funding structure that could not prevent a more local perspective from wanting to still do work, but not being able to utilize or rely on the federal funding to do that work. So that's where that local support from a funding perspective becomes even more emphasized and important. So we can still do the things that we, from a more local or state perspective, value and don't want to see end.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Follow up on the federal funding. I got tangled up in the numbers earlier. 203,500 is your annual budget?
No, I'm sorry, I should clarify. Our annual budget is about $7 million. That 203,500 is our support from our local partners. So that's the combination from Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove, Oak Ridge.
And so it's 203
thousand plus the 300,000 from the federal government plus other sources.
We get about another,
7 million.
yep, so we get about another 500 from the states, through the grant programs. And then the vast majority is through permit fees. I will say that our core operating budget isn't quite at that 7 million. So a couple slides ago. let me put these up. So these grants, these dollars, you see that bottom line, that's pass through. So these add up to more than $7 million because they're 5-year grant periods. But the money that is within our grant, which is about per year, about $2.5 million, are just passed through for these programs. So our core operating budget is right around that $3 to $4 million per year. So yeah, so of that, about 500,000 from the state, 300,000 from the federal government, about 200 or so from the local partner, and the rest of that is on permit, to permit revenue.
So is that 300,000 still coming in now?
It is, we have a contract agreement, a grant work plan with the EPA that more recently we're actually modifying because of some of the work plan and looking for items within it that might not meet muster, so to speak. And if that needs to be a revised item, or if that can still stay, or if that needs to change. And that's a work that's happening as of today, like that exchange with that grant officer, there's been email exchange back and forth. So those are items that are happening right now in terms of what is our work plan under our 105? What are the things that the EPA wants us working on? And we're working to the question of what do they want to keep and what make look differently, and the outcome to that is not yet known. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna make a joke about the permitting being like the place up at Coburg with the speed trap. But I won't bring that up. I know that you were kind of careful about this, but how far behind is the DEQ? And how does that impact you?
So from a DEQ permit process perspective, there's not really any impact on us. That's the benefit of us having our own permitting program, is we don't have to overlap the DEQ. We're like, I think DEQ sees us as a division of DEQ, and we certainly feel that way. We participate on a lot of their calls. If there's a training that DEQ is having underway, we are great, or they're gracious enough to allow us to participate on those things. There's weekly calls that we engage in, but as far as how quickly are we getting permits out, that is up to us and has no connection to DEQ. And as far as like where their backlog is, I don't know what their state level permits are, but their Title V, which are the federal permits, they're at about 47% at the moment. And in comparison, we're at about 8%. We have 14 Title V sources in Lane County. And so we have one that is on our backlog, and that's, what do you have for that?
I just think it's important to also help unpack what the implications of backlog is.
So backlog means if you have a permit, most permits are 5-year cycles. In that 5-year cycle, at the end of that permit, 6 months to the end of it, they have to submit a application renewal with us. If they beat that 6-month timeline, which says, okay, government, you have 6 months to get this new permit out the door, that seems reasonable, half a year. But if for whatever reason, we're unable to meet that mark, their permit is administratively extended. So they can still operate under their old permit until basically the government's able to update that new permit. And so that's when something's on backlog. They're still operating under their old permit, but if there's new regulations, new permit conditions that we think would be helpful to put into that permit, that enforcement of those desires don't take place until that permit is renewed.
How many employees are there in Lrapa? I mean,
19
full-time,
full-time.
are any of them dependent on these federal funds coming through on an annual basis?
Yes, if we lost our 105, our section 105, our $300,000, I think that there is some belt tightening that we could get away with before we had to like reflecting on what our FTE count is. But a large majority of our dollars going out, our expenditures every year, is personnel and staff. So at the moment, what I hear from EPA Region 10, their office, is the scrutiny is on anything that has language that includes like environmental justice, equity. If there's a component to your program that has that kind of language in it, that's where the scrutiny is. The feedback I get is for the section 105, the general Clean Air Act structure, at least at this point in time. No planned or perceived changes, but a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act funding that was passed under the Biden administration, which includes our EJ government to government, that is where the scrutiny currently is. When we lost our EJ government to government grant, we engaged with our local delegates, so Wyden, Berkeley, Foyle, to make them aware that was taking place. I think historically, the federal approach has been anytime money is engaging in a local region, the EPA engages with the delegation so they know one way or the other. And I think that there's less keeping with some of those traditions. So engage with them, trying to see where effectively we might be able to in group participate on some sort of, we would like to say something about this. On the EJ government to government grant specifically, it's a 3-year grant. The stipulation under the passing of IRA by Congress is there's no extension to these dollars. They have to be spent in 3 years. Coming up at this summer, that grant will be a year into it, and it's been on a real rough start so far. If that funding was to be restored and that grant work could get underway, I don't know how successful the program would be in a 2-year window, and then we'd have to face a reporting and turning in our work to a really scrutinizing federal perspective, to which if they weren't happy with how well that work was done, they could essentially say, you owe us all this money back anyway, which sounds like a potential risk as well. So for general fund support, things still feel pretty stable as of now. For grant support to do needed projects to improve air quality, that is very much in jeopardy.
Is there a part of your organization that is more sort of proactive in improving the quality of air? And if so, are you partnering with the city and the Willamette Lane to increase, say, like tree canopy percentages to help with wind carriers?
Yeah, we're engaged in a number of different fronts. I would say most robustly in Oakridge, where from our monitoring, we were able to say most acutely, like, yes, there's an air quality issue, but like Willamette Lane, for example, they're part of our, what's called a Rivers to Ridges group. So local prescribed burners. So we engage with them, to say, what are you trying to burn? Here's the permit you need. Here's the good day to do it because the wind direction is going to be fine. We also engage with a group called Lane P2C, which is the Pollution Prevention Coalition. So that's like City of Springfield, Eugene, Willamette Lane. A lot of the folks on that group are from a kind of a water quality perspective, but we figure out what are some collaborative efforts that we can do. Something that's ongoing and recurring is during the Home and Garden Show, we put up a booth that's sort of pollution prevention information, engage with folks at the show so they can learn some of those best practices of you don't want to put all that oil and fat down your drain because it becomes a problem for the wastewater management commission. So those kinds of things. Yeah.
If I can, I'd like to just share a quick story that I think I can piggyback off that. It will also give context, excuse me, about kind of why I think more people in Lane County should really feel excited that we have a Lrapa. And it goes to your point, well, what are we doing to help get the air quality better? Back in '68, when they identified that they were, hey, we should start this local entity, actually precedes DEQ. And the reason that was is that the air quality here, have you been living here? Any of you living here in the '60s? It was not ideal. They're burning grass fields regularly. We have the wigwam burners. If you ever drive out to Florence, you pass one of the old wigwam burners. A lot of industry was collecting things that needed to be disposed of through fire, or at least that was the choice. But it was just going into the air. And during the wintertime, you may notice we have stagnant air where it starts to kind of pile in. And so you kind of have these compounding things. Well, part of what Lrapa did is they got creative and said, how can we remove some of these polluters and help move things forward. And so that was really the big charge. The first season of Lrapa was actually a focus on the wigwam burners, getting those taken out. And so I can't remember, I feel like there were 17 of them. And so they just systematically were finding ways to get there. But then all these sawmills that are actively going, employing lots of people, doing very good things for the United States and the economy. So well, what do we do with all this leftovers? Well, that's where we started talking to partners like Rexius, who then created this product that didn't exist called mulch, that now we all know is a wonderful asset that we can beautify our lawns and protect from weeds, and it does all kinds of useful things, but it didn't exist. They created this new commodity, you know, right here in Eugene. Kingsford, I don't know if you're aware, we actually produce a whole bunch of those black charcoal briquettes that we know that you use in your grills. They're produced in Springfield. That was another business we attracted to the area, not Lrapa specifically, but we certainly were, hey, we have a lot of very inexpensive available wood products that can be turned into another commodity, right? So we went from all these wigwam burners that basically just smoldered and choked out our area. The field burning was kind of addressed through the Department of Agriculture, and they really reduced that. So now we've removed these variables. And now fast forward, now we have a much better, and so we still work with the regulated community to make sure whatever they're putting out isn't horrifically toxic. Now I think we're to a point with the wildfires is that now we have to get creative again about what might we do in a proactive way to address that. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is biomass is the fancy word for trees and things that are out in the forest that could potentially start on fire. Is what if we, with our need for electricity and things, figure out ways to take that biomass out of the forest, put it into, boilers and other technologies that exist that emit very little pollution, create electricity and other usable resources that we absolutely need with our modern lives, and you solve kind of two problems at one. Now, Lrapa is certainly in a position to be more innovative, having those conversations. And I think most of us now with the summers we're having, we're much more open to saying what we might actually have a fighting chance to do something that is a two birds, one stone, removing those things. So I think with Travis's leadership, the introduction of AI to help us with making sure that our permits are very well done, triple checked by humans, and that help we can focus on some of these more exciting horizons that absolutely, we want to see where we don't have to make so many exemptions about the air quality, right? And say, no, we feel year round we're there. But that will take a lot of community members. But without us being a local Lane County focused agency, these things would still be getting done to some degree, but EQ then is spread that much more thin. So I personally, someone new, I've only been with the agency about 7 months. I'm enamored, really impressed with both the history and like kind of the shoulders of which we stand upon and the horizon at which we look at, because we really do have, air is important, as Merlin kind of helped tease out in his anecdote. We need clean air, and I love the quality of life here. That's why I love calling this place home. I can't do a lot for your pollens and the things that are aggravating maybe your sinuses right now, but as far as making sure that it's healthy, safe, and clean, that is certainly our charge. And I really would say that we are far better off having Lrapa here than other places.
Yeah, I'll just add, one thing to that, I mean, kind of at the end here, but, as an example of that, in Oak Ridge with Brock's Woodlot, they have other grants. They got a wood innovation grant, which allowed them, given them like about $500,000 to buy some boilers, which they can use, or not a boiler, a dry kiln, they can use to dry firewood more effectively. And so they, as Brock's Woodlot, Brock and Amy are venturing into this business opportunity. They've had questions like, well, what is the air quality requirements? What permit are we going to need? What is the fee to that permit? And so they've engaged with Lrapa, and we said, let's have a meeting, let's talk about it, so you can put that into your plan. And if Lrapa wasn't here, they'd be having to try to connect with someone from the state government, with DEU, to get that same level of like, let's take a half an hour to talk about your particular plan, so you can be prepared on what the air regulatory requirements are. So in that, like trying to find solutions regionally for economic gain, that's our role, is on the air component. We have more time, effort, and energy to help people plug in those places.
I have one final question or comment. Is Lrapa unique in terms of local
a local air regulatory agency in Oregon?
Yeah, we're the, sometimes in fact, I should start saying it like this way. We're the last surviving air quality agency in Oregon. There were two others back in the day, but now we're the only local air agency in Washington. There's 7 of them. Outside of Washington, ecology sort of does that work as a DEP level. If you get back to the Northeast, local county-wide or multi-county-wide air agencies are like the norm. Like that's kind of what's the normal thing in the east, and then the farther west you go, it becomes a little bit more of a state engagement typically.
Travis, you hit 1 o'clock. Just a reminder, our next meeting will be on May 1st. We will be dealing with the elections for the Lane Community College Board of Education. There are 3 seats up for election that represent either all or some parts of Springfield. 5 candidates for those seats. We've invited all 5. 4 of them have accepted, and the last one is trying to rearrange schedules so that person can make it. It'll be here, it'll be in the larger room. So plan on coming on May 1st to find out what's happening at LCC elections. Thank you.
Thank you.